Today we're joined by best-selling author, personal growth coach and professional mentor Angela Cox. In a world that sometimes seems daunting to navigate, Angela Cox stands tall as an advocate for growth and empowerment.
The impact of us changing who we are to fit in might make us feel accepted in that moment, in that group, but the detrimental impact of that is enormous.
Through her own journey, Angela has demonstrated that growth knows no bounds.
People will say, oh, I procrastinate because I like being under pressure to hit the deadline, so I leave it until the day before and then I'm like driven to do it. That is such a load of nonsense.
Through her words, her insights and guidance, she has the remarkable ability to turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones, challenges into opportunities, and uncertainty into clarity.
And we've just got to stop listening to that little voice in the head that says we can't overstep that and do it anyway.
Angela Cox's approach is a testament to the fact that personal growth isn't just a destination, it's a lifelong expedition. So if you're ready to embark on a journey of self-discovery, if you're eager to unleash your potential, our conversation with Angela is a great place to start.
Now, motivation isn't something that just happens in you. It's something that you have to decide.
Tune in for insights, tools and techniques to embrace change in one of the most thought-provoking episodes of our series to date. With your host, George Chioka.
I think, Angela, just to start with, a massive thank you for coming from so far away.
Australia,
yeah.
such a long way.
It's been a journey. How was your flight?
It's very long. Chichester.
Not
too far.
I mean, still, I'm sure our listeners as well will appreciate and will learn quite a bit after our podcast today.
I hope so. You've definitely given me some good questions to think about, so I'm hoping that it'll add lots of value.
I think we will get started straight with the main question, and that is, how did you become a personal growth coach and what motivated you to follow this path, really?
It's a bit of a story, I've got to say. So I was working in consulting. I've worked in consulting and business transformation in corporate organizations for 20 years. And then 2018, I went to work and, I just had one of those moments of, this just isn't doing it for me anymore. I'm away from my children. I'm doing work that doesn't make me feel fulfilled. And I was due to have a meeting with my boss in this hotel lounge to talk about a new project. And he came and sat down, and we got coffee. And then I found myself saying, I want to resign. I don't want to do this anymore. And he said, well, what are you going to go and do? Where's this come from? You've not mentioned it before. And I just said, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've not thought about it. But in this moment, I know I need to resign. And so we chatted for a bit and I got in my car driving home, rang my husband and I said, I've resigned today. And he was like, I had a 6-figure salary, a really good job, really good bonus. And he's like, okay, what are you going to do? And I said, I've got no idea, but I promise you I'll make the same amount of income, whatever I do. So got home, started to look at the skills that I have, and I thought I could be a coach. I do coaching in some of the roles that I do now. I've trained in it before, so I'll set up as a coach. Next day, put in a few social media groups that I've got this coaching business. And the rest was history, really. 5 years on, I've got, hundreds of clients, thousands of clients that I've worked with around the world in different group programs and one-to-one programs. And it's the best thing I've ever done. Because from a fulfillment perspective, it's like you just feel it in your bones, this work, and you make such a difference and you can see the difference you make. So for me, I get the freedom, the flexibility and the fulfillment all rolled into one, and I can be a good mum as well.
The bonus. But what made you actually quit? Obviously, when you're in a good position and everything is going well, it's just that one moment that you want to change everything. But in your case, what was it? Because obviously, it's just it's mind blowing.
It is mind blowing, isn't it? And I'd had a bit of an epiphany in that year. So I'd built this huge Facebook community that just sort of happened by chance. And that had been going for about 2 years. There was like 25,000 people in this group, and it was mainly women who wanted to improve their lives. And we were all sort of supporting each other. It wasn't a business, it was just one of those organic things. And they'd encouraged me to write a book. So I'd written my life story, which is quite a challenging life story, in this book, and I'd put it out into the world, and it became a bestseller pretty much overnight. But this was before the time, like now you can put a book out on Amazon and be a bestseller by ticking the gymnastic category. Like, I didn't even know you could do that. So it was a genuine bestseller, which is like fab. And so that had happened, and that had started to make me think that there are different ways that you can, connect with people and get income. And so the thought of going into another corporate organization and doing another project, leading a team of people, putting up with stakeholders, all of the stress that goes into that, I was like, I just can't do this anymore. And I've proved to myself that I could do something differently. So even though it was fearful in terms of giving up an income, I just knew in my bones that I'd be able to do it and make it happen. So
believe in yourself. I think that's one of the main key things when you take whatever step you take, right?
Yeah. It's
just be sure that it will be fine.
It's trust, isn't it? It's like self-trust. My husband has the motto, keep the faith. I'm sure he stole that, didn't he, from... is it George Michael or somebody like that? But he uses that quite a lot. And whenever we're in that moment of self-doubt, which is entirely natural, he'll say, just keep the faith. And I think it's the faith in yourself that you've got the capability to do and be whatever you want. You might have to kind of figure that out, and you might have to go and get training and experience. But if you've got that deep knowing in your knower, as I call it, then you can achieve something. And we've just got to stop listening to that little voice in the head that says we can't, overstep that and do it anyway.
Which I think that's fear, isn't it?
Totally.
Fear has a massive firepower, right?
Yeah.
And it could change your life completely. I mean, fear kind of comes from a point of comfort, right? As well. You're scared of taking the step. You feel comfortable in this job, in this position, which we all do, right? We all do that. We're like, oh, this is comfortable. Why should we do this? I mean, this is more relaxed, 9 to 5. It's fine. It's, we make the money. It's okay. Why should I do something else? Why should I take the risk? But obviously, I think the hardest part is to manage that fear, right?
I think the first step in managing fear and doubt, because they're kind of the two sides of the same coin, is to first of all recognize that it's entirely natural. I can't tell you how many clients come to see me and they'll say, oh, I've got this self-doubt, or, I'm really fearful of failure, or I'm going to do this and I'm going to mess it up. And they think that that's not normal. They think they're the only person that experiences that. So the first step is for us to just recognize that that feeling is going to happen. It's as normal as brushing your teeth every day. And if you can accept that as a normal part, then through the acceptance, you also then know that you've got to be able to manage it. So it's just something that we need to learn to manage. And we have this thing called the inner critic. That voice in your head. It's usually like a parental voice that comes and tells you that you're not good enough, that you're going to mess it up, that it's all going to go wrong, people won't like you, you're not going to fit in, all of these lovely statements that the inner critic likes to try and convince us of. And what we've got to do as our second step is, once we've accepted fear is normal, we've got to get used to having conversations with that inner critic that is respectful, because that inner critic is trying to keep us safe. It wants to keep us in that comfort zone that you referred to. But we've got to say, a bit like, I've got an auntie, she's quite old, and she likes to give me her advice. And it's sort of advice that isn't really relevant to today. But you don't want to be disrespectful to your old 85-year-old aunt. So you sort of say, oh, thanks for that. Really kind of you for giving me that advice. I'll take it on board. And then you just disregard it. And that's what we've got to do with the inner critic, is say, yeah, thanks. I know you're trying to take care of me, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then the third bit is we've got to figure out what's the first step that we need to take to do it anyway. We don't have to figure out the whole thing. We don't have to figure out the end game. Just what's the first thing? Because our brain likes first steps. because it feels easy. You
Right.
know, it's just one little thing that we've got to do. Then we do that, and then what's the next thing? Do that, what's the next thing? Rather than, I've got to get to the top of that mountain, and the brain goes, oh God, no,
Long.
just stay where you are. It's so much easier. Inner critic, pipe up a bit more and stop this person from making the step.
I think that first step, it's always confusing as well, because you don't know where to start with, right? You want to, tomorrow I want to be fearless, and you know, all those motivational conversations that you have with yourself in the mirror early morning before you go to work, you know? I think everybody does it, right? You want to wear it. And as well, I think that part where you see yourself in 20 years or in 10 years, where do I want to be? You look yourself in the mirror, I was like, I want to be like that and this, you know, and you have that one-to-one with you, but somehow the moment you leave the bathroom, it's gone.
It all disappears,
It's just gone. So I think it would be quite good for us to establish, how do you establish that first step, and what can you do to avoid self-sabotaging yourself? What would you advise? What would you tell us to do?
So self-sabotage, again, is one of those normal processes that we get when we set the bar too high. So we have, you know, a sort of a comfort zone, and then you have the bar that's set here in terms of what you want to achieve. And you mentioned that word fearless. I want to be fearless. I want to, you know, and we get all the big motivators on stages saying this stuff, don't we? Now, when your brain looks at that, it goes, that's just a bridge too far, that, because there's a margin for failure in there. There's a margin for error. And if you fail and if you make errors, then you're going to feel rejected. And we don't like that feeling. So let's not do that. Let's avoid that. Let's sabotage that. Go and have a glass of wine instead. Sit on the sofa, watch Netflix. You'll be so much safer if you do that. So what we've got to do to avoid that cycle from happening is to say, rather than I'm going to be fearless, you know, and I'm going to climb Mount Everest tomorrow with no training, which feels insurmountable, we just focus on that one small thing. So what's the one small thing I'm going to do today that is different to what I did yesterday that's going to drive me forward? And that might be, if it's a Mount Everest thing that you want to do, going to find the trainer that's going to help you to get there, ordering your rucksack that's going to help you to get there, ordering the pair of shoes that's going to help you to get there. That's one of the first steps that you need to take in order to get to the top of that mountain. And your brain sees that step and it goes, oh, I can do that. I can go and find the shoes, get the shoes. Right, and then what's next? Then I need to start walking at home a little bit, don't I, round the block? See how I fare with that in my new shoes. And I start doing my walk. And then I walk a bit further. And then I walk a bit further. And then I've got to sort my nutrition out that's going to go with that. And so it's just all of these little building blocks that the brain doesn't perceive as fearful, doesn't perceive as something that's enormous, that it has to, you know, try and somehow make happen. And step by step, you still get to the outcome, but you get there without the sabotage loop.
Even that sounds quite a bit of a process. However, if you manage it properly, you will get there. And I think for you as well, there was quite a bit of a process to get from the point of leaving your job and getting to this point, right? Was it easy? Was it hard to become a personal growth coach?
Personal growth coach, high performance coach, life coach. I've tried them all in terms of title. I mean, basically, it's just about helping people to see what they don't see and to see what they won't see. Those are the two things really that I help people to do. Now, when I set out from that leaving the job and going to see my husband and saying, I've left my job, I'm going to be a coach, I had no real coaching qualifications other than a Grow Model 1 that I'd done probably in the 90s at work. So I was like, I know how to work with people. I'm quite good with people. I know about business transformation. So I know how we take something from a current state to a future state and what's the process in between. So I'll be good at this. And then you get clients in front of you and you recognize that you can kind of help that client to a certain extent without any training. And you can perhaps help them to get from A to B in terms of a goal that they might have. But it's all a bit superficial and surface level, that is. And then what you find is that client comes back 3 months later and goes, I'm stuck again. And you go, why is this then? And you realize that to truly help people to perform and to exceed and to be who they want to be, you've really got to dig into the past first, and not in a, sit down and tell me about your mother way. It's not like that. It's a real solution focused. Let's look for the root of trauma. Let's look for the root of limiting beliefs. Let's do some work there so that you can then spring forward into your potential. You can spring forward into your authentic self. And of course, to do that, you've got to understand how psychology works, how neuroscience works. You've got to understand the processes that you apply with people. So I then had to go on this journey of training and gathering experience, and some of the training was better than others, and I spent a lot of money on it, a lot of time on it, and through that I've been able to pinpoint the best parts of how to work with an individual, and almost created my own process now, my own method of how to do that. But it was pretty hard, going through all of that.
So when you mentioned earlier you spent quite a bit of money, now can you put a figure on it?
I can.
Because I know how much money you've spent on it, and it's impressive, and it's a lot.
Yeah, impressive or stupid, one or the two. I mean, this time last year it was 70,000. Now it's 120,000 pounds. 13 different therapeutic modalities. I went to Cambridge University. I went to King's College London. Started a doctoral study. So lots and lots and lots of investment. But it isn't for me just the money, it's the time as well. So, for most parts, I had 2 full-time jobs, one coaching people and one studying, because it takes hours and hours and hours of time. But I've got to say, despite the fact I spent all of that money, it has really helped me to become a better coach. But the thing that's helped the most is working with the people, because every single client is different. And you've got to be able to, it's like having a bag at the side of you with all of the tools and techniques and know-how. And for every client that comes along, you've got to be able to pick up a different thing and go, this is the right thing for this client. So it's not a cookie cutter approach where you just roll out the grow model for each client over and over again. It's right, what's going on with this person? They've had lots of trauma, so we've got to do lots of work on their trauma. This person hasn't had any trauma, but they've got loads of limiting beliefs about themselves. Where has that come from? And you have to apply it to each person differently. Maybe
a silly question, but you mentioned earlier trauma. Most common traumas would be one of the questions, but I think, where does that start from? Is it childhood? Where does it start? And how does that grow over time? And how can you change that? Because obviously it's been with you for like 20, 30 years. How do you change that?
So there's 2 different types of trauma. We have big T trauma, which are things like abuse. That might be a natural disaster that's happened, could happen in later life. So you might have a car accident, you might lose a limb. We have lots of our armed forces that have traumas in later life, obviously, when they're seeing the atrocities that they see. So those are big T traumas. But actually the ones that really impact how we think and feel about ourselves are what we call the small T traumas that happen in childhood. And this is things like you being at school, and loads of people have this one. It's a real common one. The teacher makes you read a book in front of the class. And you don't like that anyway because everybody's looking at you, but then you stumble over a word, and in that stumble the class laugh at you, and there's an element of humiliation. That's a small T trauma. And what happens then in later life is you're sitting in a meeting at work, and you've got that thing where the execs say, can everybody introduce themselves to our new client? And so it starts going around the table and everybody's having their turn, and you're sitting there and your body's going into fight or flight because it's going to be your turn in a minute. And when it's your turn, everybody's going to be looking at you. It's going to feel super uncomfortable. People are going to laugh at you. It's going to be humiliating again. That's what you're saying to yourself. Now, that's not true, because when you do your bit, nobody laughs and it's perfectly safe. But the reason you think it's not safe is because of that 6-7-year-old experience at school, which is sitting on the amygdala in the brain. And I call it a landmine. It's like it's sitting there as a landmine, waiting for a current experience to come and trigger it. And when it gets triggered, the body goes into fight or flight. You get that emotional response in your body. It feels horrible. It prevents you from reaching your potential because you'll stay small. You don't want to do it. And what we've got to do is find those things in the amygdala in the brain and clear them up. And if we can clear them up, you don't get that reaction.
Might be a silly question, but how do you clear something like that up? Because obviously is it there, as you just said, there's a landmine.
Yeah.
How can you clear something like that up?
Well, this is what cost me £120,000, George,
to
to try and find the root, because I was trying to find something that would help me clear up my childhood trauma.
Right.
And I tried everything. I tried hypnotherapy. I'd been to an NLP practitioner and spent fortunes on days with people like that. I'd tried working with a psychologist. I'd tried lots and lots of different ways. And none of it was really working. It was helping, but not fully working. And then I discovered these two American doctors who had created something called Havening techniques. And it's transformational, this technique. For me, it is hands down the greatest thing I've ever come across. And what you see when you apply the Havening technique to a small t trauma, you see the brain landscape change. So if you were in a brain scan, you'd be able to see different colours lighting up, which show that the amygdala is being stimulated. And then this process called depotentiation, which sounds really posh. So I like to think of that as the bomb disposal unit coming in and taking the charge out of that landmine. That's kind of what happens with the Havening technique. And then you remember it as something horrible that happened, but it doesn't give you that emotional response in your body.
Right.
And clients, when I do this with them, literally sit there and go, they have their eyes closed and they've gone into their trauma and had this awful connection with it. And then we do the work and then they go back in and they're like, literally like, they can't find it. They can't access the feeling anymore. And that's transformational in terms of how you then operate as a human moving forwards.
That is definitely quite a lot to take in and understand. And yeah, that clarifies the 120 grand. It does big time. But is this part of the coaching that you do with Pasida 360? Or let's talk a bit about Pasida 360, because this is a new project, right? It started not long ago. And I think our listeners and our viewers would want to know a bit more about Pasida 360 and how they can get in touch with you. How can they find out a bit more? Because obviously we will cover quite a bit in this podcast, but not everything. And they need to come and see you. They will want to come and see you and find out a bit more. So I think first is first, Pasida 360, and then we'll talk about further the one-to-one coaching.
Okie dokie. Well, I mean, Pasida 360, I'm glad that you got the name right, because we have every name under the sun when people try and say it. I'll tell you the story about the name in a moment, but how did it come about? 2 years ago to the day, actually, my husband went to Wales for a weekend with my daughter and didn't come home. So he ended up in intensive care with a brain injury and was in intensive care and then hospital and then rehab for about a year. And, you know, he couldn't speak properly, didn't know who we were. There was this kind of whole period of our life which was awful.
Yeah.
And he was self-employed at the time, and obviously so was I as a coach. And what I realized was when somebody's out of action, they can't work. And we all, you know, as freelancers, this is one of our biggest problems to solve is if we're sick, we can't work.
Yeah.
So he couldn't work, but I couldn't work either to the extent I would do normally because I had 2 children to look after and him. So suddenly, from a financial perspective, you're in a situation where the whole household income has just gone to zero. And we got through that, but I reflected when he'd got better and thought about that more deeply and realised that I needed to be able to build something that was future-proof, whereby he could come and work in the business because he's a coach as well, if he couldn't make a full recovery from the brain injury. I had something that wasn't fully reliant on me being present. And from a future-proof perspective, we'd build this business that would bring in income if we couldn't work.
Yeah.
So this idea for actually developing my own method of coaching, which I already prove day in, day out with my clients, came to me, and Posita 360 was born. And we're now training other coaches in this revolutionary method of coaching. And the idea behind it is, I've talked about Grow Model a couple of times already today. I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet when it comes to Grow Model, because coach training that I found £120,000 worth of is so stuck in the 1980s. And if you imagine, right, you were still using your mobile phone, imagine this tech setup that you've got here was the 1980s tech setup. Can you imagine? We've come such a long way. And yet coach training and coaching still says that when you work with a human being, you can only work in this really narrow remit if you're a coach. You mustn't ever go into the past. You've got to really stay in the present and the future with your client. And if you're an exec coach, you work on work and not home. If you're a life coach, you work at home and not at work. And it's like, my God, from the client's perspective, how many people do they need to work with in order to sort their life out? There's got to be a better way. And so the better way is Posita 360. And we've created this model that breaks all of the rules of 1980s coaching and thinks about the client's needs and what they need. And, you know, delivers that in this really great 120 hours worth of training, loads of support, great student experience that we'll be able to deliver. We are delivering for people now.
Going back to the realm of one-to-one coaching, because our podcast is about freelancers, it's about, you know, professionals or business owners who want to be a bit better. How can they benefit from, you know, your program? Tell us a bit more.
And not just from my program, you know, from coaching in general. I would say everybody needs a coach. But with freelancers and professionals who run their own business, one of the big challenges is this idea that you never know where your next client is coming from. A lot of the time, you know, people talk about this rhythmic acquisition of customers, and that can be really tough to crack. So that really sets us up for this roller coaster of feeling fabulous when you just win a new client to feeling self-doubt when it's not quite going the way that you want it. Then a client ghosts you, don't they? And, you know, then you feel this sense of rejection that's coming in. So we really are set up as freelancers and entrepreneurs in this minefield of fabulous 1 minute and then feeling rubbish the next minute. And we also, I feel, get in our own way. As humans, we get in our own way. So our potential might be set here and we only ever go there. And, you know, in the self-doubt days, then we're down here. But there's this gap here that we need to be able to fill. And that gap can be achieved. You can close that gap with coaching. Someone who sits in front of you, observes what I call the worst self-behaviors and plays those back to you, really allows you to see how you're holding yourself back, so that then you can go and alter your behavior and start to move forward. You can start to manage those self-doubt days. You can celebrate the win days, because we're not very good at that either.
We're horrible at celebrating what we do as success, or we forget really quick about it. But do we remember everything we did wrong the whole year?
My God.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. We're fantastic at that.
It's like the perfectionist mindset is, I have a win and I just go, all right, move on. You know, you don't even tick it.
No,
it's
you
just
don't.
like whatever.
We forget to appreciate the wins, and we forget to appreciate ourselves more. We should give us a bit more time off, which we never do. What's that? What is time off?
Balance. We just don't have it, do we?
But that affects our performance, our well-being, our health, which we take completely out of the equation.
Totally.
What does it mean sleep 2-3 hours a night? That's perfect. It's fine. Carry on. But weekend comes, and weekend doesn't actually come ever. What would you advise business owners and entrepreneurs to do in those situations besides step back for a second?
It's, if you think about a corporate organization and you work inside a corporate, in those organizations you have scorecards, you have targets that you need to be able to hit, you have quarterly reviews where you sit down and you examine your own performance from your own point of view. Your boss does the same. You set your development plan in terms of things that you want to focus on. You take your 6-week holidays because that's mapped out for you. You take your weekends off a lot of the time because you're able to. And I think entrepreneurs need to apply that same mindset of, how do you take yourself through a review process? How do you recognize where you've got highs and lows and acknowledge those? And from a work-life perspective, then it's really about ensuring that you stay in tip-top health. And from a health perspective, it is about that sleep. So we've got to have good sleep hygiene. We've got to have good nutrition. We've got to be able to take moments through the day where we're allowed to go out and have a quick walk, or, you know, do something that is listening to music or something that makes you feel good. Because when we go back to that gap, that performance gap, we can close that gap by making sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And if we were employing people as entrepreneurs, then it's really important that we role model the good behaviors around that too, so that we don't end up with teams that are burnt out and can't deliver because they're copying what we do as entrepreneurs. But we've also got to be real, haven't we, that it is 24/7 when you run your own business. You know, you can't just go away and let your clients wait. You can't just, you know, switch off and disappear for 2 weeks on holiday. There has to be that level of continuous service that we offer.
Yeah.
But I do feel like we make excuses around that to, you know, keep busy, keep being there, keep going, keep driving, as you say. And sometimes we just got to step back from that and say, how is this serving us? And how is this serving the clients?
Because definitely it will have an impact on your work, right? If you don't use the handbrake more often, it will reflect on your work, and then everything you're trying to build just of a sudden doesn't look right anymore. Forget about even the fact that you start to burn out. Let's don't take that into account as well, because you're going to burn out at one point. But speaking of, we will talk about burnout further. I think speaking of advices, what advice do you have for freelancers and business owners who struggle with self-doubt and imposter syndrome?
The first thing about imposter syndrome is I don't believe imposter syndrome is a thing.
Okay.
So I think we need to step away from the imposter syndrome label. Imposter syndrome is basically a belief, a limiting belief that we're going to get found out, is what people say. And it naturally occurs as a feeling when we are going into something that's new or uncertain. So you see people really dial up this imposter syndrome when perhaps they're launching a new product, or they've got a new client on board, or they've got a new role, or something that is new for them. It really dials up then. And basically, it is just the self-doubt that sits inside us that is going, oh, I don't like this, because we really like certainty as human beings. We really like to know what's going to happen when. And when we don't know that, and we've got to figure it out, the self-doubt monster that's inside of us starts to make us feel uneasy. Yeah. So as entrepreneurs, as freelancers, what we've got to be able to do is to say, I've not got something wrong with me. I've not got a syndrome. Step away from that label. I've got a really natural response to something that I don't know how to do yet, or something that's brand new. Yeah. So how do I go and find more clarity? I had a great boss once, and he used to say, create clarity where there is none. And in an uncertain situation, we have a lack of clarity. So as an entrepreneur, to get over that feeling of self-doubt, a bit like we said earlier about figure out the first step, figure out the clarity around the unknown. What do we actually know? What isn't changing? Because if we can anchor to what isn't changing about our situation, we anchor to the confidence that's inside us, and that reduces the self-doubt. And then when we accept that the doubt is natural as part of the fact that we're doing something new, everything just sort of settles down. But when we're telling ourselves we've got a syndrome, I mean, there is this like test that you can do where you hold a piece of paper with the word disease on it and you muscle test. So you put your arm out, and if you're holding the piece of paper with disease, a person can come and push down on your arm and your arm will collapse. And then you hold a piece
interesting.
of paper with the word belief on it. And you think about the word belief and you put your arm out and someone comes along and tries to push it down and they can't because the arm is steady. So that's the same. If we're saying, oh, I've got imposter syndrome, you see people's shoulders go down.
Yeah.
You see the impact on their muscle memory. And it's the same thing. We've got to step away from these labels.
Also from the negative side of the labels, right? Because obviously you attract what you put out there at the end of the day. So if you think that, this negative way of expressing about yourself is what you are, it will start to imprint in your behavior, in your thinking, and people will see you like that. So I think thinking positive is one of the main takeaways from this point, right? Just think positive and try to exclude everything negative towards yourself, right?
And know that that is a management system.
Mm.
So we don't wake up as human beings positive. It doesn't work. Because we're wired to have loads of negative thoughts. We're wired to see threat. That's the way that we work. So nobody wakes up like that. Jazz hands. We've got to manage that as an internal system. So when the negative thought creeps in, we've got to reframe the thought. When the self-doubt is piping up, we've got to pipe it down by letting ourselves know that we're okay, that we're safe, that we've got this. So you're back to your point about in the mirror in the morning. At times when I feel quite a lot of doubt, which, is a natural cycle through a year, you have times where you're blooming a bit like a plant, you're blooming full of flowers and then all the flowers disappear and then you have those periods where you're a bit more like, and it's just twigs. We're just like that. So at times when you're feeling low, certainly what I do is I have affirmations around my bathroom mirror. So when I'm brushing my teeth in the morning, they're all there and I just repeat them because our brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. So when we're feeding ourselves this, I am strong, I am capable, I'm healthy, when I'm feeding myself all of that, the brain goes, okay, this must be true. How do I start living in that way? And we start to move towards that, as opposed to what we'd normally do in the mirror in the morning is, oh my God, it's going to be such a hard day today.
This is about attracting
Everybody
the negative
hates
side
me.
as well. There you go. There you go. Attracting negative. Just all of a sudden, the day, it's exactly how you've predicted it.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
And it becomes your truth.
So even if it's hard to wake up in the morning and be positive, do those small steps, right?
You've got to.
The ones that we've discussed at the beginning.
Yeah.
Baby steps towards what your goal is, but also to a more positive mindset. It's so easy for us to say it, but I'm 100% sure the people that are going to listen to us will be like, oh, it's so hard to do that. Oh my God, I don't think I can do it. I don't think it's for me. I'm not like that.
It's so hard. And, I have clients who come in and I might work with somebody for 6 months and we'll perhaps talk about affirmations and say, you're wanting to get promoted, so we want a set of affirmations around I'm promoted, I'm in the new role, and we build this dialogue for them to practice. And they'll come in 2 weeks later and I'll go, have you been doing your affirmations? No. And you go,
at least they're honest about it.
It's 90 seconds. That's all you need to do. And it's like, it's so hard for us to do that self-management.
Yes, it's
so
because it feels like a thing that you don't really truly believe in.
Exactly.
I think it comes to that as well. You really need to believe into the things that you want to change about yourself, because it will never happen if you don't.
You've got to put the work in.
Yeah, you got to put the work
going to the gym, it's the same thing. But little wins, right? So like the affirmations around your bathroom mirror, but you can even have an affirmation as the login for your computer. So every time you go in and unlock your screen, you're saying the affirmation to yourself as you type it in. I mean, that's genius.
Yeah.
And it's such a small thing, but it makes a massive difference.
Also, there's another thing that I feel that freelancers have, or I don't really think business owners do, but freelancers, when they're, on set, in our situation right now, they're on set, loads of people around, and they feel they don't fit in.
Yeah.
And they feel that, nothing that they do, it's relevant. How do you help people like that, right?
It's so sad, isn't it? And you know what? That is like, it's not just freelancers. That is a massive proportion of the population, because everybody has this innate need to belong.
Mm-hmm.
We're born with that. We want to be able to fit in. We want to be able to be accepted. And yet, we're also born with an innate need to judge. So we go into a room full of people and our inner judge is on. And we all like to pretend that we don't have this. Like, oh, I'm a nice person, I don't judge. But we do. It's just really supernatural. I'm looking around and I'm going, who are my people in this room? Now, when we're judging, we are deciding you're in or you're out. We're making that call. And so by nature of that, we are deciding you can belong here and you can't belong here. So the thing that we want is to belong.
Yeah.
And yet for other people, we decide whether they do or don't. And that means those people are judging us and deciding whether we do or don't. So it's like this huge paradox where our own behavior prevents us from having the very thing that we want. And so what do? We change who we are in order to try and fit in. I remember in my consulting days, George, pretending to like red wine, pretending to like politics, to be able to sit with fellow consultants and, super posh clients in order to feel like I was accepted. And I hated red wine. I mean, what was I doing? But we do these things. I'd put on a posh accent, pretend I wasn't from Bolton.
Just so you can...
Yeah, to be accepted by this group. And when I work with people now, I'm saying the impact of us changing who we are to fit in might make us feel accepted in that moment, in that group. But the detrimental impact of that is enormous.
Yeah.
Because as a result of that, we feel shame, we feel guilt, we feel frustration, we feel rejection, because we know that the true version of us isn't being accepted, and we have to wear this mask in order to be friends with these people.
I find that in so many situations, being yourself, it's actually much better.
Oh, totally.
It's even if you think that someone will like you for that facade or that mask that you're trying to put there, it's actually the opposite. You might harm your image or yourself more by trying to pretend you're someone that you're not, rather than being yourself. People will like for who you are. Yes. There will be that one thing. All of us, we have that one thing that everybody likes, that one thing that connects. Yeah. All right, if that group of people doesn't connect with you, that's fine. Yeah. You still be you. You still be colorful and friendly and however you are. Feel comfortable, because then in that point is where you're surrounded by these people, around these people, and you can control the conversation. You can actually make points, statements, have a conversation, feel fine, and at the end of the day, by the time you left that event or whatever it is, you wouldn't feel good. You feel good. You feel like, I own that conversation. It was such a nice evening. But if you do the opposite, the moment you leave, you're like, oh, I just hope everyone saw me nice, and I hope everybody saw me in this way, and they thought about it, and I hope I didn't say that wrong, and all of those thoughts, which is exhausting, I feel. And funny you mentioned earlier about the P. I remember there's 4 P's that we need to talk about in this podcast, and I think let's go back on that for a second, station there, and tell us about the 4 P's that you coach.
Yeah, because it's relevantness to this whole masking who we are to fit in and to belong. So I've worked out this model called the pretender model. So when we're not being ourselves, we're pretending. And there's 4 different types of pretender that I've identified. And the first one is the perfectionist pretender. And the perfectionist pretender isn't about dotting I's and crossing T's. The perfectionist is about reputation. Mm-hmm. So real risk of burnout with a perfectionist pretender, because you will go over and above to try and prove your reputation with people. You'll work all the hours. You'll probably procrastinate quite a lot because there's a massive margin for error in what you're doing. So you'll leave things to the last minute. But you're basically being somebody that you're definitely not in order to be accepted. So we have our perfectionist. We have people pleaser. Now, I was a people pleaser for 20 years in corporate.
To some extent, most of us are. to some extent.
Exactly. Everybody is, to a certain extent, all 4 of these P's, but you have a driver. And mine was people pleaser. And it's exhausting, people pleasing, because you put everybody's needs ahead of your own. You will do anything that anybody wants in order to be able to get on and move on. So people pleasing, lack of boundaries, lack of self-trust, a lack of self-worth, because everybody else is more important than you. Then we've got the persecutors. There's 2 persecutors as our other 2 P's. Persecutor of self. So that is, I'm never going to be able to do this. They're not going to like me. Everything's going to go wrong. Everything's your fault, basically, if you're a persecutor of self. And that really prevents you from unlocking that potential and from being truly you. Because if everything's your fault, then you can't possibly put your true self forward. You've got to be able to mask it. And then persecutor of others is the type of person that goes in and with their mask on will blame everybody else around them. It's everyone else's fault. Really quite nasty in terms of person, but underneath that, that's not who they are. They just use that as a power play to be able to own the space. So they're really intrusive behaviors. But importantly, they are masks. So that's not who the person is underneath. It's masks that they use. And when we use those masks, it develops this sense of shame inside us because we know that's not who we are. It develops other emotions like exhaustion. And the next thing we do is worse self-behaviors like eating too much, drinking too much, gambling too much, smoking too much, or whatever. Whenever the mask comes out, it leads to those behaviors. And then we get sabotage loops and all the things we've already talked about. So our key is to identify the mask that we wear, when do we wear it, and how do we stop wearing it to the extent that we do.
So I think as an exercise for our listeners, it could be quite nice maybe after our podcast if they would try to identify this, right? Let's take this as an example and find out of the 4 P's that we've discussed, if they've identified one of them, what should they do?
Well, they can actually do our test. We have a pretender test. So we take you through loads of different examples. You choose your appropriate outcome, and it tells you at the end which one is your preferred pretender.
Is this online? Sorry to interrupt you. Right.
Yeah.
So you will give us the link and we'll put it here in the description.
Wow.
So let's help them to be better, right?
Yeah,
That's the point of it. So you do the test, and then what after that?
You do the test, you get the outcome that says your preferred pretender position is perfectionist. It then tells you why that is. So it tells you what's happened in your history and what limiting beliefs have you got that are making you behave this way. And then it tells you what to start looking out for. And our biggest area of change is self-awareness. So as soon as you know that this is what you do and this is why you do it and this is how it will be showing up for you, you then start to see that in your behavior. And then ideally you go and see a coach and you take this information to them and you say, I do this thing. So, I put on this perfectionist mask and I procrastinate around deadlines and I'm really frightened about my reputation being at risk. And the coach can then help you to unpack all of that and start to put in some strategies that are going to help you to move away from it.
Yeah.
But the awareness of it is the key, because as soon as you see it happening, you can go, oh.
I think one other factor that I would like to, or one other element that I would like to focus on with you now, because we're not going to cover all the P's, is the people pleaser. What can you do to avoid to become or to stop being a people pleaser?
I don't think you can stop being a people pleaser. I don't think we can stop being a perfectionist or any of the others. We can reduce significantly by getting closer to our authentic self. And in a people pleaser perspective, it's often that there's no boundaries. There's little self-value and there's no boundaries. So first thing, we've got to raise up the self-value, because we over-please others when we don't feel enough about ourselves and we don't think enough about ourselves. So I have this exercise that everybody rolls their eyes at when I first say it, but it is a transformational exercise, which is the self-value baseline. And the self-value baseline is basically to ask you to write down 100 things that you love about yourself. So George, if I said to you, give me 3 things that you love about yourself right now, what would they be?
God, good question. And this wasn't even prepared. I don't know. I'm perfectionist, for Christ's sake. That's one of them. Unbelievable. Yeah, the perfectionist. I like to keep my word. That's a second one.
Nice.
And then a third one. Is it perfectionist again?
And see, I wouldn't let you write perfectionist on there as a good thing. No. So we'd have attention to detail maybe as a good thing. Definitely keeping your word. We've got that real loyalty about you. Give me another one.
Loyalty. That is really important. I do actually like to, maintain my loyalty towards clients, towards people that are with us as an agency. And I think that's a quite valuable thing. I find it a very valuable thing in anyone's character.
I mean,
loyalty.
It's written on your forehead.
Oh, is it?
That is, in terms of who you are as a person. In the time I've got to know you, I can see that. So here we've just had 2 things plus a perfectionist, which is the not the real version of you. So I'm not going to let you have that. So give me one more.
A third one about myself. God, I can't point out anything else. Like, it's the thing. It's just like, I don't know, because I probably don't think enough of the positive things about myself. I just see the negatives as a main thing, right? It's incredible. Yeah.
And this is why the self-value baseline is such a powerful exercise, because I say to people, I want you to write down 100 things that you love about yourself and, get the rolly eye. But then people go, I can't do it. Because we don't ever shine a light on what's right. We always look in that mirror and see what's wrong.
Yeah.
And so 100 things are wonderful about you, and I'll make it easier. I'm going to give you 4 categories. So category 1 is your appearance. Category 2, your personality. Category 3, your talents and skills. And then category 4 is how you help other people. Now, people pleasers are usually very good at the how you help other people category, and they're not very good at the other 3. And what we've got to do is fill up that whole thing with 100 things so that the self-value starts to come up. Once you anchor to what's right about you, it impacts your confidence, it impacts how you show up. You kind of sit a little bit straighter, and you're less likely to need to please other people in order to get validated, because you're validating yourself. And then the next step for the people pleaser, once they've got their 100 things, is to then say, what are my boundaries?
Which is so hard to define.
So hard.
Because you always want to help the client, you always want to over-deliver.
And I want us to just decouple those 2 things. So over-delivering when you're an entrepreneur or a freelancer is a really good thing. It could actually be part of your business model to do that, because that really builds that client loyalty, client advocacy. It's a great thing. People pleasing, though, is saying yes when you really want to say no. So, this happens in Brené Brown's book. If you've never read Brené Brown's stuff, then do, because she's fabulous. But she talks about someone coming and saying, can you make brownies for the school fair tomorrow? And she's like, yeah. And then goes home seething, full of resentment, because she's got so much on her plate, and now she's got to make flipping brownies for the school fair she hasn't got the time for. But because she's a people pleaser, she said yes. And we've got to start to learn to say no rather than say yes and resent it. Because when we resent it as a people pleaser, the worst self-behaviors come through, and the next thing you're making the brownies and then eating them all.
Yeah.
Because you're so fed up.
Yeah. What advice do you have for someone who is feeling exhausted from acting their way through life and wants to start embracing their true self? Because I feel that this is really connected to what we just discussed.
It's huge, isn't it? And the majority of people I meet are in this position where they've just had enough. I've had enough of, doing it for everybody else. And they come with a sense of exhaustion. And what I always say right at the beginning is, you have a choice here. as human beings, we have a choice as to what we want to do, be, have. And it might not feel like you have at the time because you've got all these responsibilities and you've got a mortgage to pay and you've got children in private school and you've got your business or whatever, and it all feels really heavy. But you have a choice as to whether you want to continue down the path that you're on as the performer, whether you want to continue down that path as your authentic self, or whether there's a completely different path for you. And once we uncover all of that and you get to make that choice, there's an element of freedom that is attached to that. But you have to be able to accept initially that that choice is yours. And so often people will sit in the chair and say, oh yeah, but my dad wouldn't have liked that. Wouldn't have, because he's not here anymore. You know, he's passed. And yet the person is still being governed by what their dad wanted or what their mum wanted. And we can't live like that because it's so stifling. We've got to really connect with that true version of us, what we want, prioritize us, because being selfish about that means that we are so much better for everybody else around us. So just know that you've got the choice, and you might not have figured out what that means. Back to me in that hotel lounge going, I'm resigning, no idea what I'm going to do, but I'll figure it out. And you will figure it out, and it will be better for it. I feel better for 5 years out of corporate, so much better.
You feel fulfilled.
I feel fulfilled,
Yeah.
But more importantly, I feel like I can rock up to something like this today as 45-year-old woman with frizzy hair and, you know.
Shout out to makeup.
Exactly. And I don't care what people think.
Yeah.
You know, I used to care so much about what people think or thought, and now I don't, because I'm so validated by who I am. And so happy that I'm from Bolton and I've got this northern accent, and, you know, I can be a bit eccentric at times, and I've got an ADHD brain, and all of that just makes me who I am. And I feel like I can be that without anybody having a say, because I made that choice to do it my way.
I'm really grateful for everything that we've learned today with you, Angela. And if we have to recap, I think this podcast should be listened at least 2 or 3 times by our listeners to really get a full grasp of what you can actually help them achieve. And if they don't listen to this podcast for 2 or 3 times, they better grab the phone and give you a text or ring you and book in, because becoming better at what we do, becoming the best version of ourselves, it really starts with us, with the action of let's just do it. Baby steps, as you mentioned at the beginning. And now that we're nearly at the end of the podcast, I think my final question, as always, would be, is there an advice that you would give to entrepreneurs, freelancers out there?
Yeah, I think what would my main advice would be, know it in your knower that you can achieve, be, do, have whatever you want to have. If somebody else has done it before you, it is completely doable. But really connect with who you are and what you want, and you can have it all. You genuinely can have it all.
Thank you so much, Angela.
It's been a joy.
Thank you.
Loved it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.